Basically, Terrell Owens got voted into the Hall of Fame this cycle after being snubbed in previous cycles. And, he was very publicly upset about the previous instances when he didn't get voted in. And I think that's sort of coloring how a lot of people are perceiving what recently happened, which is that he has made it publicly known that he will decline to attend the Hall of Fame enshrinement ceremony in Canton in a couple weeks. So that's sort of what started the whole thing. And of course, the Hall of Fame in Canton, they actually responded to this information. And basically what they said is, okay, we're sorry to hear this. We'll avoid mentioning your name to the extent that that's possible during the ceremony. Basically, they're going to make it as though he doesn't exist, kind of ignore him as much as possible. And so some people are criticizing Terrell Owens, and now some people are criticizing the Hall of Fame for their response. They felt that the Hall of Fame was kind of maybe stooping to his level a little bit, maybe interpreted their response as being a little bit petty. So, yeah, both sides have attracted their fair share of criticism for the current state of things. Now, I should preface this by saying I might not have voted for Terrell Owens if I were voting for the Hall of Fame. And it's tricky. It's tricky because the question is, how would you define a Hall of Fame player? And some people don't even like that question. Like some people would say, it's pure eye test. You know one when you're watching one. You know one when their career is going on. And, if you have to think about whether or not it's a Hall of Famer, it's not a Hall of Famer. And, that's why you have the seniors committee to evaluate the players whose careers took place more than 25 years ago, because, you really want people who are around when these players were playing and actually saw what they were like in a game week in and week out, and saw like what impact they had on their opponents, how they played against the best opponents, how people perceived them as their career was going on and all that. So, I mean, the closest you can really get to a real definable sense of what a Hall of Famer is in shorthand, basically, you're the best at your position for more than a season, or you're very close to the top for a lot of seasons. And I don't think you'd put Tio in that first category. I do think you could put him in the second one, definitely. Then there's the other question, do you take anything else into account other than how effective of a player they were? And I think basically no. If they're kind of a bad person off the field, or if they kind of get into a lot of trouble after they're done playing, or anything like that, I wouldn't take into account. That's why I don't think there should be any serious discussion of removing someone like OJ from the Hall of Fame, nor is there any serious discussion of that to my knowledge. Maybe there is. I'd have to look that up later. But things that actually do affect the game, that affect the team's ability to win, I think those do count for something. If a person's missing games because of drug abuse violations, I think that obviously should count against them. If they're getting stupid penalties and costing the team a lot of yards, that counts against it. And T.O.'s kind of interesting because I think you really can put him in sort of a gray area between those two things. And a team cuts you during the season because they feel like you're making the team worse by being on it. I think that is part of the player that you are. So, as a player, I think you can put T.O. again, it's tough with receivers too, because with receivers, I feel like that's probably the easiest position to get into the Hall of Fame at, because there's that kind of lead pack of the greatest ever play, the Jerry Rice, the Don Hutson, the Randy Moss. And then there's kind of a chase pack of receivers that are a good tier below them, but some players from that chase pack are getting into the Hall. So it definitely wouldn't be unprecedented for a TO to get in based on his skill level. Like when I think about Randy Moss's career, I just never ever saw a player who could do what Moss did. Just dash to the back of the end zone, reach up over his head without really looking, and just feel the ball and bring the ball into his hands and just slam on the brakes right before going out of bounds to get those back of the end zone touchdowns. Just, man, he torched so many secondaries that way. It was almost unfair. And I don't think T.O. is ever quite that level of unstoppable, but then again, Tim Brown is also in the Hall of Fame, and T.O. is definitely a more dominant player than Tim Brown was. So that's kind of a long preface, but when it comes to his decision to skip the ceremony in Canton, it's a little bit tricky to weigh in on, because he hasn't been super explicit about what his reasons are. He's hinted, I think, when someone brought up Jerry Kramer, that he's partly doing it out of solidarity with other players who have waited too long to get into the Hall of Fame, people who are, maybe like semifinalists or finalists but didn't get in, which is kind of silly because, you can only put in 7 players a year max. So, yeah, there are really impressive players that, just the year that they're up, there's 7 that were a little more impressive. So if they got in, someone else wouldn't. So he's not really lobbying for a cause that there's a great answer to. It's kind of an unfixable problem if the problem is great players getting snubbed before they get in. But I think a point that he's really emphasized, and the criticism, the speculation is that he's doing this because he's salty that he didn't get in the first couple times he was eligible. And I guess that's fair, but what he's said explicitly about this, that I think he's kind of, and this is where I'll defend him a little bit, this is where I can kind of relate a little bit, is he really wants to do this in University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, where he played his college ball, where he went to school. And, obviously that's Tennessee, Chattanooga. It's not exactly a football factory. Chattanooga isn't a huge city. It's like a little over 100,000 people, I think. But, like when I think about like what a place like that means to, a guy that went there and then went really big and then became an NFL star. And I think about what it means to have him come back and give the Hall of Fame speech there. Like put yourself in the position of like a student there, an employee, or an alumni who's still in the area, or even a resident who's just, in Chattanooga that was like around when, T.O. was a college player, and watch him go through the NFL. Doesn't it mean so much more to them to have him there on that day than it would to anybody in Canton? Even the people who are really involved with the ceremony, obviously their hearts are in it too, but they do this every year with another 7 guys. So it's a very eccentric move on his part to want to do it there, but it's one I think you can relate to. And what John Madden said about football players, these guys are artists. And it's true, they are. So they're going to do something that's a little bit wayward sometimes. And, it sounds like he's very excited, and you only get one chance to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And, clearly this is the way he's going to get the most out of it and feel the love in a way that he wouldn't doing it in Canton. So there's that. I don't, think there's something to hate on him over. I really don't. Now, with that said, I can also kind of see it from the Hall of Fame's perspective in that this whole event for them, what kind of makes it a big event and a big ceremony is that they've always got the guys together in person there, unless it's, someone who's posthumously inducted, in which case there's usually like a relative or a coach or something that gives the speech on their behalf. But, such a big part of the event and the ceremony for like the organizers of the event and the institution that is the NFL Hall of Fame is about that physical presence, is about that physical presence of all 5 or 7 guys. And I don't know that I would necessarily worry about what T.O.'s doing becoming a precedent, but that chance that it might, if it did, that does kind of throw a wrench in what they're trying to do. That kind of throws a wrench in this event of theirs that they do every year. So you can see why they wouldn't want to respond as though, oh yeah, this is an option. Everybody got to do this their own way. It's like for the draft, you can do that. For the draft, like there's always plenty of highly drafted players that rather than attending the draft kind of, have a special event for themselves at home with their families or at their schools. And it's not necessarily a big deal for the draft because there's still plenty of players who do attend and do come up on the stage and, add that bit of appeal for the fans. Like the draft isn't worried about like everybody doing that, but because of, I guess the way the Hall of Fame induction worked is because it's a very small number of guys each year. So if even say 2 or 3 decided that like, what, I'm going to, do this from my hometown, and give a speech there. Yeah, it throws a wrench in things. So yeah, I get why they don't want people doing that. I think they definitely had that in mind when they were deciding how to respond is, how do we look at this? Do we look at this as a perfectly legitimate thing to do? They wanted to discourage it in a way that was as respectful as possible, but make the disapproval clear if they could. And, it sounds like I'm taking both sides of this, but that's because, it's one of those things where people really want to create controversy, but I can see why both parties in this acted the way they did. So anyway, really, I'm definitely looking forward to the induction. I was a little bummed out because there's a couple guys, Ty Law, Tony Baselli, that were finalists that I was really hoping would make it, and neither of them did. But that's okay. It's still looking forward to it. Definitely looking forward to the Hall of Fame game. Getting to see Lamar Jackson on an NFL football field. You get to see Anthony Miller out there. It's going to be really cool. I'm excited.